When I was a kid, every weekend I would go to the local movie renting place and rent a PS2 game. And one of those times, I rented this game that was a top-down hack-and-slash game kind of like Diablo. I thought it was really cool when I was a kid, but then I returned it and forgot about it. But I would occasionally think about it again. And then movie renting places went out of business and I never found it again. But I thought about it again, and this time I was an adult. And I spent 20 minutes on Google and I think I found it. Champions Return to Arms. It fit the description, the cover art felt familiar, but I can't be too sure about the gameplay. I can't shake this feeling that the game might have been Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance 2. Still, the way character selection goes felt really familiar, so I guess I'll have to review Dark Alliance 2 to be sure. Anyway, going back and playing a PS2 game felt nostalgic and gave me a warm feeling, even if fiddling with the emulator to get the game working and looking good was kind of ruining that feeling. I never managed to make the text look good, but everything else looked mostly good. And because I'm playing on an emulator, there are some things wrong that I attribute to the emulator. Like this one boss fight where performance went to shit. I think that's just the emulator. It probably looked and played better on the PS2. But what I got was acceptable to me. With that out of the way, we can get into the review, and if you liked the video, subscribe, hope you enjoy. Premise. The game is set in the EverQuest universe, from the MMO people were playing before World of Warcraft came out. I have never played EverQuest and know nothing of its lore, and having that knowledge would help a lot. Because I was mostly just confused and didn't really know what was going on. And there were a lot of names thrown at me that were meaningless to me. Just think of it as standard fantasy and you will be mostly fine. You've been summoned by Fiona V, who's a paladin princess or something. And she tells you that the forces of good and evil were in a battle, in the plane of war. The forces of good were winning, but the forces of evil had an ace up their sleeve. And the forces of good suffered severe losses. To the point that the fate of the universe rests entirely on your shoulders. Your level 1 shoulders. Things are bad. So off you go to the plane of war to save the day, and get whatever the forces of good were after. In there, you get approached by a woman, and yeah, they really did do things differently back then. She works for the evil side, and she gives you the whole spiel that the forces of good are losing, and evil is definitely gonna win, so you might as well join them. But my mom raised me to say no to strippers who approach me in a dark alleyway. She even has a pole. You can choose to join her and be in the dark side. I didn't do that. And from what I've seen, it doesn't really change much. Mostly just the beginning and the end of the game. Anyway, let's move on. Wait, we are almost or currently in 2024. So let's fix this oppressive male gaze design. Obvious first step. Cover up those things, just using whatever. It just needs to completely hide that she is possibly a woman. Next step, the face. It needs to reflect real women. And the real women aren't pretty. So let's just give her the Mary Jane treatment. Yeah, make her look like the Mario 64 guy. Perfect. Now we can continue. If you choose good, then you will be working to thwart the forces of evil and vice versa. This will take you to many different planes or levels in the EverQuest universe. Gameplay. Early on in the game, you can mostly just go in and slap enemies around with little to no consequences. It functions like a twin-stick shooter, pick a direction and attack. And the early game of just slapping enemies around highlights the strength of this game. Hits are really satisfying. Great sound, that little flash of hitting the enemy is good feedback, and sometimes your hits will throw enemies back. Feels really good. You can also switch from melee to a ranged weapon set, which I realized much later in the game. But it's incredibly useful, and I love when games let you have two sets of weapons. And having a ranged set became necessary later on, because there were enemies in lava throwing rocks at me, and if I walk into lava, I die. You can also block. Early in the game I felt this was pretty useless, but later became absolutely necessary, because of the tormentors. They will charge you down, pull the wool over your head, and proceed to skullfuck you. Unless you block, then you're just fine. You only block in front of you, so positioning is important. You can dodge attacks by walking out of their hitbox, but it's unreliable, since you're not that fast. It's better to attack enemies and hope that you stagger them, but that too is unreliable, and that's why blocking is king. But I was playing the Shadow Knight, and the Shadow Knight can get a passive skill when leveling up, called Riposte, where there is a 10% chance of you dealing automatic damage to an enemy that attacks you. And the Tormentor attacks a lot, and he doesn't break my block. So I could just stand there and block and wait for him to kill himself on my riposte. In theory, I could just block, wait for an opening and then attack, but the problem with this game is that the openings for a free attack are really small, to the point that it feels like every attack you make is going to have to be a trade. So cheesing the game is not necessarily encouraged, it's required. Blocking and waiting for a riposte is one variant of cheese, but for others, let's look at spells. You can have 2 on quick cast and 9 in the spellbook. One method early was running away and shooting the Disease Bolt when I could, but that sucks. I could summon a skeleton and just let that tank enemies while I killed them. I could create a trail of disease behind me while I ran, and that is how I beat the final boss, with a level 1 Trail of Disease. I just activated it and ran away, and he could never catch up because the Trail of Disease would stagger him. It isn't just bosses you need to cheese, it's kinda just the normal enemies. They deal a lot of damage to you, and spells cost a lot of mana. So you'll be going through potions like a medieval substance abuse addict. Like sometimes the enemies I come across just on some field somewhere will slap me down in a second. And they can stagger you or have some element that gets through your block. This is a punishing game. The Dark Souls of twin-stick shooters. Ugh. You're not just going in for a jolly time man-fighting everything. No, you go in like a one-man SWAT team, slowly clearing everything out, after each encounter getting your health back up, and preparing for your next unlubed encounter. And even then, you still die a lot. Especially when you hit the difficulty jump. The Plane of Torment. This separates the men from the schizophrenics. The men will say, okay, that's enough, I'm done with this game. The schizophrenic will have 4 voices in their head, telling him, come on, you're halfway through the game, you've almost beaten it, you can do it. And 1 additional voice saying, maybe you should stop, this isn't good for your blood pressure. Guess which voices I listen to? Before this point, you can mostly get away with just man-fighting everything as long as you use potions. But here, you have to discover the block button, because of the Tormentor. He will eat your health down like it's nothing, and then you have these ghoul skeleton freaks that will go down and pretend they're dead, and then get back up when your back is turned. The skeletons are not so bad, it's just that there's a lot of them. And then it also has this awful thing, it's not a puzzle, but you have to do it to progress. You have to carry a fire from one place to another, and the timing on this can be extremely tight. And you're going to have to go through the path, you will have to carry it and kill all the enemies, then go back, get the fire, and take it to the place it has to go. I hate backtracking like this, but it's not the worst objective. That would be the plane of water, where you have to slowly push a block across the map and into a hole. 3 times. Back to Torment. Then you get into the Citadel of Pain. It has tormentors too, that's already bad enough, but now you have stealth jump scare boys and goblin archers. I hate them. Stealth boys are fine, but archers shoot you and run away when you get close. At least they run away in a panicked circle, so it's easy to get them. Then there's this. What the fuck is this? It's just more pain. Slightly less annoying than the Tormentor though. It's the combination of all these enemies that force you to play in a very careful playstyle, and punishes you heavily for deviating. But man, the catharsis of finally beating it felt so good. Everything after the Plane of Torment was pretty fine. Some places even easier, but that's maybe because I learned how to deal with all the shit in the Plane of Torment. And there were some annoyances later, like in the Plane of Fire. If I put even a foot into the lava, then I was dead. And there was this maze where I was getting shot at by a lot of archers, and arrows deal a surprising amount of damage. But I did enjoy my time. When you finally manage to get a good build going and get good items with good enchantments or whatever, the game becomes more fun, because it's much less of a struggle, and you're more capable. Because it's so punishing and hard, you feel much better when you become stronger. It becomes more of an even fight, and more enjoyable. But even with that, I think the game would have benefited from a slight pull down on the difficulty. When it comes to items, enemies will drop them, and then you can go to Firiona V or Natasla if that's what you're into, and sell the trash and buy potions or items. But it was rare that I found a good item in the shop, and super rare that I found an item that was anything other than the standard rarity. And if it was the blue or yellow rare, then the stats weren't really good. So for weapons, I just went after what had the highest damage and then put enchantments on it. And with armor, I went after the armor stat, and then enchantments, and that worked out much better for me than going after the rares. There was also a constant battle with inventory weight, more items, more weight, and you have a cap. And I reached that cap constantly. But going back to the shop is super quick and easy. You just need a gate scroll, and later I started putting skill points into the "you have more carry capacity" skill. You need that because you can actually carry your stats through the bear, cat, owl and bull figurines. They drop from enemies, and stockpiling them and selecting the right skills and focusing on the correct stats from items will make the game easier on you and more fun. I'm pretty sure I made the game harder than it needed to be by not building my character right in the beginning and not buying items at all, and just hoping good ones would drop. It's a punishing game, but the combat is really satisfying and really cathartic when you beat the hard sections. Story. The story is definitely not what you should be here for, especially if you're not familiar with EverQuest. The story is just people talking at you with very few cutscenes, and most of what they say to you is Grimlaharx the Annihilator is stealing fission cubes in the plane of sad boys. Please stop him. And I'm sure they tried to inject some lore into the stuff that was said to me, but my brain filtered it out. And most of the dialogue can be interpreted as bad guy or thing here, you go kill. And I think that will work out best for you. Unless you're really into EverQuest, then I guess you can be very happy that they mentioned some obscure character, probably, maybe. I liked the voice acting, I thought it was pretty good. It had some weird compression thing, but maybe that's just what the PS2 was like. Or maybe it's the emulator. Some of the voice acting can be a bit cheesy. I think there was one that sounded like a kid's movie bad guy.
I tire of you like a tasteless meal. Now be gone. Ralos has armies to conquer and mortals to crush.
And then there was one who made me feel like I was cheating on my girlfriend.
Wait a minute. You're a fearless warrior. Would you be so kind as to, retrieve it for me? I would be oh so very grateful.
Why is this mermaid talking to me like this? If we worked together, she would be hearing from human resources. Characters also have animations and dialogue, so they're not just static. The story is window dressing. What you're here for is the punishing gameplay, but the occasional cutscene doesn't hurt. Like this vampire that came and said that I was the cause of all of his problems, and I had no idea who he is. The story was okay. It wasn't boring, but not engaging either. Conclusion. Is this a game I would recommend people to go back and play? No. Its difficulty curve and the punishing nature of the game is more likely to frustrate you than it is likely you will enjoy it. I think there's a reason that Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance 1 and 2 got remasters and Champions of Norath 1 and 2 didn't. That also might be because of the influence from Baldur's Gate 3. But after playing Return to Arms myself, while I did enjoy parts, there is just a lot of anti-fun stuff. Like the Tormentor's relentless attacks that just lock you into blocking for what feels like a minute. There was also a stealth section, and while it wasn't that bad, it's just, why are you putting a stealth section in a game like this? Stealth sections in games that aren't stealth games are always the worst part. And it was a struggle to figure out what build is a good build. And they had those terrible map objectives, and it had terrible challenges. Like one where you're against the 4 horsemen and they just kill you instantly, or the awful water one where you have to move between oxygen things and gather pearls. And the oxygen runs out extremely fast. And you also move slower in the water plane, so you die a lot from just not knowing where the next oxygen thing is. There's just a lot of design issues like that here. It's just, I feel like the difficulty here is not a result of them wanting to make a hard game, but just from bad design. But at the same time, you also have the tools you need to beat all the enemies. It's just that using those tools isn't always fun. This game is more about overcoming challenges and achieving catharsis than having fun. But after playing Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance 2, I appreciate the challenge of Return to Arms more. Dark Alliance 2 is much easier and the combat feels a little more fleshed out here. Attacks have more than one animation and positioning and precisely timed blocking is more important. Dark Alliance 2 just feels too simple when you compare it to this one. Yeah, you'll die more, but that's because you have to work more to overcome its challenge. And that also makes it more satisfying and cathartic, but still frustrating. I recommend it only if you want to share my pain or you can tolerate annoying enemies and objectives. And I give the game a Tormentor out of, okay guys, how much partial nudity can we get away with? It was nice to play something obscure and old school. And yeah, it was either Champions of Norrath 1 or 2 that I played as a kid. It was certainly not one of the Dark Alliance games. Playing Champions Return to Arms feels like finishing a side quest that's been in my quest log since the beginning of the game. Thank you for watching, subscribe and have a painful day.